Hybrid Cloud Show, Episode 12. I'm Aaron.
I'm Gary.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Shane.
Welcome to the show about public cloud, private cloud, and everything in between. Our views here are ours and not those of our employers. So somebody pointed out to me that our shows were very heavy on the work and not as much the fun that we see on some of the other late-night Linux shows, and I took that as a bit of a challenge. So I wanted to ask you all about how we have fun in cloud computing, and I am prepared to hear that in fact we are all extremely dull people. But please feel free to correct me and show me how you have fun in cloud computing.
Nah, you've nailed it. We're dull. There's no fun.
There's a ton of fun. I mean, not when the bill comes, but who doesn't want to spin up 1,000 instances of Nginx because they can?
Yeah, maybe we're just the sort of computer equivalents of Motorheads or something, and you like, or maybe that's the opposite because we don't know how it works. I don't know. But there is something about sitting on a huge pile of compute that you can orchestrate to your will, I think.
I've been burned too many times spinning up resources to be like, I can safely get rid of all these and I won't pay for this on my credit card, surprisingly, at the end of the month.
Yeah, I think anything that I run in the cloud personally is a bit like the mechanic's car, to be honest. I just try and avoid it if I can. I spend all day doing it, and yeah, I don't want to do it when I get home.
I think the home stuff is interesting in that before I started to take a more descriptive model to how I run stuff at home, I did find, and still do for the stuff I haven't converted, find the manual admin of home stuff a real drag. There's one thing to have a Jellyfin server at home, but when the Jellyfin server breaks and you've got to set it all up again yourself without having automation, it is a dog.
Yeah. 2 nights ago, I was up till midnight because I have a master-slave configuration for a database for my Matrix server, and there was a replication error, and it caused one of my tables to get corrupted. And trying to figure that out and learn how to solve that on my own was not fun at midnight, but I know I'm better for it. And now I have more skills. That's what I'm taking away from this. Some optimism here, guys.
That sounds more like training than fun.
That sounds like the kind of thing that I'd want to end up learning on a database that wasn't mine, to be honest.
This is like pager calls in the middle of the night, replica lag, worst case scenario. This is our pitch for fun in the cloud, yeah? Okay.
But where I was going with that is that I do think it's more interesting when your home infra is code. Like there's a little bit more satisfaction to me when you're writing something that feels more like code than there is in me just sitting there tweaking config files and doing everything manually on a server. But it's probably a push to call that fun.
Well, I mean, it makes the home infrastructure a bit more manageable, I think. I saw a colleague tweeting out yesterday that he had a Raspberry Pi running Debian 10 and was trying to upgrade to Debian 11 or something, and couldn't find a working in-place upgrade path that would work for him, so was manually going and upgrading every single package. Otherwise, he would have to spend like 4 hours reconfiguring this Debian box. And I was just thinking, why did you not do it as code? And then you could have just backed up the data and blew it away and run the code again. And I think for me, that's what makes it more fun, is knowing that I've got this set of infrastructure and I could throw it in the bin tomorrow and have it rebuilt in a couple of hours, including copying all of the data back. And knowing how to do that in a way that's kind of idempotent, and it doesn't matter if I suddenly decide, you know what, I want to move to 2404 for all of my production VMs. It's just going to work. And those are tangible skills that I can take away and learn, but I'm not necessarily sure that they're cloud skills.
So you like the automation part of it, right? That's how you get the enjoyment out of it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Like, there's nothing fun anymore about going and like repatching a switch or going and next finishing through the Ubuntu server installer to me. That's stuff I've done a million times, and to be honest, feels a little bit more like a chore.
Sure.
Like just today, I went and repatched the switch in my garage because the cables looked messy and there was some dust. And it just felt like a chore. It felt like, hoovering behind the sofa. It's one of those things that you probably should do, but you don't want to admit that you don't do as often as you think you should.
And I've always enjoyed the sort of code side more than the sysadmin side anyway. So I like kind of pottering with that and the idea that you can make it more precise, or, you can, every time I add a feature to something that is in code, it feels more exciting than if I'm just dinking with something that I know I'm going to break at some point and have to redo another day. So I think there is a little bit of that, but I'm still not sure I'm at fun yet.
Yeah, we haven't gotten the fun, but it's slightly more fun than dealing with dependency hell.
I did do something that I would call fun as part of a cloud training thing at some point. I think it was one of the Azure workshops, and I don't know if it was on their Learn or it was something else, but I did do something there where they were showing off a bunch of their technologies, and it was I think it was a low-code type thing where you link together some sentiment analysis on tweets and then could trigger events that came out of that. So, when someone tweeted about your product with a negative sentiment, then you could have it email everyone or something. And I thought some of that stuff is really fun to POC an idea and make the case to yourself, I guess, or test something out to see whether it's something you want to invest the time in to do it properly. Because I'm never going to stand up machine learning infrastructure on my server to run sentiment analysis on tweets to then see if anything happens. Whereas I did that for 10 minutes and I saw a couple of tweets that fit the conditions and it worked. And you're kind of like, that is quite fun, that you can do something and get such a good result at the top end of all of that infrastructure and then rebuild all of the pieces yourself if you want to.
Let me ask you a question. Why not do that at home? Given you have the resources, let's just assume that. What's funner about doing it in a cloud environment than doing it in your own home lab?
I think my point was that it's much quicker to get to a result. So it wasn't the building of it that I found interesting. It was seeing that it was possible. And then I think if I'd done it, and that was something that was important to me as a person or as a business, then I might replicate those pieces in real infrastructure if that made sense from like a cost perspective and all those kinds of things. But the fact that it was so quick in minutes to get to the point where you could prove out an idea and see, hey, that's quite cool. This is scanning Twitter and it's finding these things and then it's doing something that proves an idea that I thought was quite fun.
Yeah, that's true for me as well, I think. Like some of those workshops where you go and you very quickly POC an idea that has a problem that is already there that you can solve in a way that is clearly explained to you and learn something in the process. I think that's pretty fun. I've done a similar one to you, Aaron, but it was for the AWS serverless coffee workshop where they'd have this coffee stand that they take out to the various AWS events. And it's effectively there as a demo of step functions and Lambda and DynamoDB and various other AWS services. But I guess the perk at the end of it, if you do it in real life, is that you get a free coffee. But for me, it was quite nice to see how these services that I don't necessarily work with every day fit together. And the outcome is that I end up with a working coffee ordering system that I can then throw away at the end of it. But it just shows me how a set of things that I wouldn't usually use then apply to a real world problem.
So it sounds like Gary likes puzzles and coffee.
Yeah, I could go with that. Yeah, coffee more than puzzles, but yeah, we'll take it.
I think there's also an opportunity to make it fun. So sometimes in my job, I'll need to learn some dry, boring piece of technology.
Surely not.
No, I know. Shocking, right? One of the problems I had to solve was splitting up our company's tech resources into multiple AWS accounts. And we hadn't done that before. We had to do a lot with AWS organizations. And I wanted to muck around with this and prove how it worked myself. So I also wanted to learn some Terraform. And I wanted to solve a really cheap problem leveraging the cloud as much as I could. So I have this thing called the Kindle Scribe. It's like a e-ink tablet where you can write on it. So the problem I wanted to solve was I'm going to write something on this tablet, send an email, and it's going to post to Mastodon. How can I do that? Learn all this gubbins about AWS account organization stuff and Terraform and do something stupid and cheap. So I wrote all this stuff in Terraform, did some interesting stuff around accounts where I had a billing account and an ephemeral account for deving this thing, which would nuke everything in the account daily, which is something I wanted to take to the engineers of the company rather than having long-lived developer accounts. And then I basically had something that would take in an email. So using Amazon SES would invoke a Lambda, and then that Lambda would post the status. And my aim was the opposite of Sean's spinning up a billion Nginx servers, was to get as cheaply as possible. So I think my bill, including DNS, is 13 cents a month to run this thing. So I was pretty pleased with that. And that's not the sort of thing you can solve. It's not as satisfying maybe to solve like with a Python script that just pulls an IMAP server every day. Like it just felt like, I'm properly end to end using the cloud to solve this problem the way it should be used, really. So I find those things kind of fun, but I need to invent that problem for myself to then solve it in the cloud, basically.
I think that might be the first time I've heard AWS organizations and fun used in the same sentence.
I'm impressed I managed to do that. I made it fun for me. Probably no one else but me.
I think part of the problem with this question is that we're asking for people who choose to spend their spare time doing a podcast about the hybrid cloud.
I think you make a good point, though, in needing to have a problem to solve, because I think that's what stops me getting started a lot of the time, is that I know if I've got a website to host, I can spin up an Nginx server and a Postgres database in about 10 minutes because I've got some kind of Ansible or something written somewhere that will just go and do it. And my will to go and work out those bits to do it in S3 with Aurora or something else is way, way less than my will to just go, I'm going to reuse the thing I've already got. And that's when I have got a problem to solve, right? If I just want to go and learn insert service here, coming up with that problem to solve to go and write that code or go and learn about that service is often the difficult thing for me.
I think a lot of the challenges, self-hosting problems and like problems you might have at home you can play around with, don't tend to be event driven. So it benefits from just have a server website, have a server thing I need, like an API or whatever. I had to come up with a problem that was, this will be event driven. I can scale with it. This fits the cloud in my brain. So it's finding those problems I find more challenging, and I need to get creative inventing event driven problems for stuff.
And having something to generate those events as well. Like in your case, the best you could come up with was, I receive an email, right? There's not some real high-end thing that's generating thousands of events per second that you can then consume in an imaginative way.
Not at all. It's highly scalable, but it gets one event probably every 2 weeks, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe not the best test, but it does show that you know how the bits glue together.
Exactly. I mean, it's probably like most cloud, it's super scalable, but no one uses it.
Do you think it's fair to say then that we all like to see that instant gratification of something we built immediately work, whether that's a post on Mastodon or free coffee?
I think quick feedback's really important. And I think that's a lot of the reason why it's less fun. Like we're comparing ourselves to like Linux where, I want to try a new distro. Look at all that shiny new stuff I can play around with. That feedback's a little harder to get when you're playing around with the cloud a little more. But yeah, trying to figure out a way to like iterate quickly, get a result really fast. That's what motivates me. If I have to spend hours and hours trawling through some horrendous problem, I'll just tire out and give up, basically, go to bed.
Yeah, I would also say that cloud here, as always, is amorphous in that I'm not talking about cloud necessarily when you say, quick feedback, that kind of stuff. You can do a lot of it on-prem with sort of cloud-type technologies. I think for me, I do a lot of playing with things in a cloudy way with my LXD server, but it's basically the same sort of instant gratification in that you want to try a VM of a new distro, then you pull down, you create an image of that and start using it in a way that you couldn't back when you were installing that a bit more manually. To me, it's not even the instantness of it in that it's removing the layers of friction. I think there was a lot of friction between idea and implementation in a lot of the old ways of doing things, and each layer of those stopped me having fun or stopped me doing it. Whereas you can get very quickly to the piece of the problem that interests you, and then you can always replace the layers in between that bit that interests you and the underlying operating system or whatever, if you want to do that or it makes sense to do that in the future.
Sean, you mentioned spinning up 1,000 Nginx servers. Have you ever done something like that for fun, and why?
Yeah, I have. But it was on my private cloud. It was on my boxes. It wasn't on the public cloud. I didn't get a big bill at the end. But yeah, it was Kubernetes, and it was just to see, given 100 cores and 200 gigabytes of RAM, like, how far can I push you? So I started with like 10, saw those spin up. I was like, cool. What about 50? What about 100? What about 1,000? And then I learned what resource requests and limits are.
That's good. You're just poking the resource bear there to see where you hit the limit. I'd say, actually, you make a good point about like playing around with Kubernetes on your own hardware. I've been very much in AWS cloud for a very long time. And again, I'm trying to move to Kubernetes more. I'm having like a little more fun in the tooling around it than I was in AWS, where it's like, yeah, here's how you solve that. We've already got a product for that. Don't think about this anymore. Whereas now I'm playing around with like things like Argo CD and Flux and getting into grips with Helm a bit more. That tooling, all that open source goodness is actually kind of fun to play with once you get your head around Kubernetes, and that's its own kettle of fish. But I'm feeling those like early days Linux vibes of like, I don't know what I'm doing, but this is kind of cool looking.
Is that the fun bit?
It's that shiny new thing, right? Like I get like in a previous episode, Gary mentioned Lens as a way to visualize multiple Kubernetes clusters, and I tried that out. That looks shiny. That's pretty cool. Wow, that does that. Like, it's just a bit more fun with the tools rather than always being like, right, let's pull up a CloudFormation template. Okay, let's read the docs. All right, yeah, like it's just like getting a little bit more instant gratification whilst you're doing something productive, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like, for me, learning a new thing and then learning the next thing around it, like spinning up a Kubernetes cluster and then going, okay, now how do I get traffic in and out of it? How do I do that in the most efficient way? And then going, how do I visualize this stuff using Lens or something like that? That's a really interesting, cool thing to go and look at for a couple of days. And as long as they're things that I'm not going to get stuck on, and they're things that I can do relatively easily and see that goal and realize it and move forward, then I think that's where some of the fun is. And you mentioned, Sean, thousands of Nginx containers. There's a really cool demo a guy I work with did at one of our offsites once, where he was running BottleRocket on a Raspberry Pi, which is the AWS OS that sits under things like Fargate. And he demoed like spinning up 2,000 WordPress instances on a Raspberry Pi in like 30 seconds or something ridiculous using BottleRocket. And that was really, really cool to see. Like, just sitting this Raspberry Pi in the middle of the conference table and then going, cool, now it's 2,000 WordPress servers. Cool, now I'm hammering it with traffic. Oh, it's fallen over. That was a cool thing to see. And it's kind of showing some of the power, I guess, of like the underpinnings of what the cloud is and how that scales down to something as small as an 8 gig Pi 4.
We used to go to conferences a lot with these little boxes that I'm making hand signals that no one can see, but they were very small things that had in them, I think it was 5 Intel NUCs. And we used that to do data center in a box, basically. So we'd be at a conference and you could deploy MAS on that, and then you could deploy OpenStack on this little thing. And it always struck me that whenever we went to a conference with these things, more people asked questions about the box than they did about the stuff that we were deploying on them. But there is something about being able to deploy some of these cloudy things on something that people can see and feel.
Dude, MAS was a cool product. I had a lot of fun with that.
I just have an image of you coming to conferences going, this is the internet.
You can push those Intel NUCs pretty far. I'm actually pretty surprised.
Yeah, those were always pretty good. And then they sort of led on to me running a lot of home stuff on mini PCs or those little Wise boxes that our network has become so famous for now. Like, you can do a lot with a low-end piece of hardware. And I guess that's quite a fun thing to play with as well, is just seeing how far can I push this thing that consumes like less than a light bulb from the wall.
It's not something I've done, but the idea of getting a bunch of low-powered machines and building a cloud out of them, I think is very cool. It's just, again, going back to kind of fun and home infrastructure. I don't really want to be debugging high availability issues when I just want to watch something on the TV from the Jellyfin box.
Oh man, there's a reason that none of my home stuff has any kind of high availability at all, and it's just a Linux box with a few containers on, and if it breaks, I can just pull the containers and run them elsewhere. Sean is shaking his head at me with his multiple R720s and Kubernetes clusters at home.
Because I can, Gary.
I mean, I could, but I don't want to be the person who sits down and goes, oh, I've missed a network rule to allow the Plex server or that particular server that's running that Plex container to talk to the TV tuner. And now I've got to go and update that. And just no, I want to sit down and click on BBC One, and that's me.
Does the fun that you do in your personal life based on cloud have to be different from the cloudy stuff you do at work?
I think for me, it should be, because I spend all day doing that stuff at work, and anything fun I do at home that ends up turning into a learning exercise for something that I then have to implement at work immediately becomes not fun anymore when PagerDuty's going off at 2:00 in the morning and this thing that I built in my home lab that's now in production for work is suddenly broken, and I've got to learn why.
Yeah, there's got to be clear delineation. Like, I might use some of the same technologies that I use at work just because I'm familiar with those tools. That's how I want to achieve it, but keep them separate.
Agreed. I'll pick up the similar tech if I want to learn something that I'll take to work, but it won't be related in terms of like productionizing or delivering or anything else. All that stuff's boring, to be honest with you. I want to be a complete cowboy because it's fun to be a cowboy on my own stuff. But crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's, which I'll do at work, that mode is not on when I'm playing because otherwise it's just not that fun.
Yeah, I think there's also a limit to what I'm willing to do in my spare time. Like in my spare time, I'm willing to learn foundational technology that sits underneath something and how it works and how those bits fit together. And then I think any of the, how do I productionize this? How do I make sure secrets are stored safely? How do I make sure that it's across multiple data centers and has replicas and backups and stuff? I feel like that sort of crosses over into, okay, I should be being paid for this now because my work hat's on. And they're the sort of things where I'd maybe want a spike or something in a sprint to go away and work out, okay, how do I go and back up AWS parameter store? Because I don't really care about that for my home stuff.
I find exploring some of the new cloud technologies interesting, and I would even almost say fun, even in a work context, in a way I think that wasn't the case when I was playing with other kinds of technology. Like, I think a lot of the newness, I suppose, or the variety in what you can do in the cloud lets me go on tangents that are fun to explore in a way I don't think I had when I was working in other bits of the industry. So I would say that I find cloud more fun in a work context than I did just generally working in IT stuff before.
I guess for me, it's because the cloud is so accessible. When I was running large Hyper-V and VMware clusters on-prem, I didn't have access to go and play with that stuff at home, so I found other new and interesting things to go and play with at home. Yeah, I didn't have a 42U rack with a SAN and a bunch of Dell boxes in. And I know Sean is shaking his head at me again because he does. But the bottom line is that stuff wasn't accessible to me 15 years ago in the way that AWS is now, right? I can open an AWS account with my personal credit card and within reason have access to exactly the same resources and technologies that I do at work. So I think that's a really difficult thing for me to get my head around, is where that line is, because there are certain things that I'm absolutely only doing because I know that it's going to be coming up at work, or I know that there's a specific technology I want to learn to be ahead of the curve. Whereas that just wasn't possible when I needed, a rack full of things.
Yeah, it was a brilliant move from AWS to have that low barrier for entry, that free usage tier for engineers. It really got people hopping on and playing around with whatever was there, which is, was a great move.
I'd like to go on record and just say I do not condone having Dell boxes and SANs and stuff in your closet. It's overkill, just for the record.
Nah, you love it.
I do love it.
Well, I think we're getting to the end now, so we can wrap this up. But before I do, I want to say thank you to our existing supporters on PayPal and Patreon. If you want to join those people, you can at hybridcloudshow.com/support, where for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an ad-free feed of this show or all the Late Night Linux family shows. And sometimes you receive episodes early. We talked a bit today about how we like to solve problems, so if you have any problems that we can solve, please do send those in, show@hybridcloudshow.com. And why don't you tell us what interesting things you do for fun relating to hybrid cloud, so we can talk about that instead of some of the dull things we find interesting. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, I've been Aaron.
I've been Gary.
I've been Sean.
And I've been Shane.
See you later.